The war against spam has been going on for decades. Email spam blockers and ad blockers help protect us from unwanted messages in our communication and browsing experience. These spam prevention tools are powered by machine learning, and that machine learning catches most of the emails and ads that we don't want to see. TrueCaller is a company that is bringing this quality of spam detection to our phone call systems. Umut Alp is the CTO of TrueCaller, and he joins the show today to break down the engineering problems of preventing telephone call spam. Users of TrueCaller install it on their phone, and the software allows users to report when they have received a spam phone call. Using this reporting mechanism as crowdsourcing, and also using other learning algorithms, TrueCaller is able to learn what types of calls it should block from being accepted by your phone. Today on Software Engineering Daily, we discuss cell phone spam prevention. If you enjoyed today's episode, you can share it on Twitter or Facebook. It helps the show grow. Word of mouth is the best way that we grow. And you can also just tell your friends over lunch about your favorite episode. You can also send me an email at softwareengineeringdaily@gmail.com and let me know what you think of the show, what you want me to change, what you want me to improve on, what kinds of topics you want to hear about. I am always looking for new show ideas, always looking for feedback. Thank you for listening, and now let's get on with the show after a quick message from our sponsor. This episode of Software Engineering Daily is sponsored by Braintree Payments. Mobile app development can be complex, but integrating your payments no longer has to be complex. With Braintree, your business can accept nearly every type of payment from any device with just one integration. Learn more at braintreepayments.com/sedaily. Braintree's API supports Android, iOS, JavaScript, and many other languages. The documentation for Braintree is clear and elegant, and if you're integrating payments into your app for the first time, you can call Braintree's customer service and get assistance with your integration. Don't get frustrated when you're trying to integrate payments and monetization into your app. Go to braintreepayments.com/sedaily and monetize your app today. braintreepayments.com/sedaily. Now let's get on with this episode of Software Engineering Daily. Thanks for listening. Umut Alp is the CTO at TrueCaller. Umut, welcome to Software Engineering Daily.
Thank you.
Let's start by explaining what TrueCaller does from a high level. Could you explain that?
Yeah, sure. On a very high level, we are actually a global caller ID application. So we are trying to enhance the communication, like phone communication, because we all have smartphones in our pockets, hands all the time. And part of our communication daily routine is making calls, receiving calls, SMSs and such. So we are enhancing that. Like instead of seeing numbers, 5s and 7s and such, you see names and pictures and some other information. So you don't have scam calls, unknown numbers, missed calls that you don't know who they are. So we are solving that problem for a global audience. So it works globally, and so far we reached more than 200 million users worldwide.
When you look at TrueCaller at the current product from the top down, what are the engineering problems that you break the product into?
Lots of them. So, in the beginning, it was always like any other startup. It was about product market fit, how we can iterate quickly and come to a point that we solve our users' problems and solve it in a sophisticated way, in a nice way. So the UX was, part of it, and also data quality was part of it. So that was the initial phases, and then after a couple of millions of users, there comes the scalability, reliability issues, and because no system is designed for millions of users from day one. So then came the challenges of migrating whatever now we call it legacy, but back then it was the systems. So migration and changing it, improving reliability, improving failure modes and such. So that was the second phase, I would say, more maturity phase. And now actually we are trying to shave off latencies and such to give better service to our users. So that's more sophisticated problem. So that's the third phase that we are at right now.
So let's start with the core engineering problem, or at least the first engineering problem that I can see from the top down, which is the idea of spam prevention. So when I get a call from a number that is suspected as spam, TrueCaller will tell me that this might be a spammer. How does TrueCaller know when a number is from a spammer?
So it's a combination of a lot of things, actually. So we have our own data coming from like some manual research and some partners worldwide and such. So that's one source. But the big contribution is actually coming from our users. Like each and every user, when they bump into a spam call, they actually contribute that information back, that signal back. So we use that signal together with other signals and also call patterns that we see, because we see who is calling who is searching for which phone number, with what frequency and such. So all these information, all these signals are processed, and we have certain algorithms for that, and we are trying to optimize for the best algorithm. That means changing it all the time, because I don't know if you know it or not, but in most countries, spam numbers are changing all the time. Like they get a number, use it for a while, and then change it. And it goes like that. So the algorithm should be very responsive, but not giving you false positives to stop your calls, basically. So it's a big challenge.
Absolutely. And in many cases of the spammer versus a spam blocker, like in email spam or perhaps in text message spam, there's this constant war of attrition between the spammer and the anti-spammer, where each side, the spammers and the anti-spammers, are constantly learning. Like I think of Gmail's filter, for example. How is that battle going? Like who is kind of winning the battle between spammer and anti-spammer?
I think for us at least, I can answer that question from my end. For us, we are definitely winning in the markets that we have a significant volume of users, which means the spam callers, they are actually calling people, and if we have a significant amount of users in that market, in that country, then we get enough signals to actually stop them. So that was actually the initial traction for TrueCaller. Like if we go back in time, like 5 years, and look at which countries we became, top app, you can clearly see the spam effect, like spammers calling people all the time, having scam calls like Nigerian princes and all those stuff. So those countries were the initial places that we got big.
So when I get a phone call and I have TrueCaller installed, TrueCaller needs to tell me whether or not that is a piece of spam. Does the TrueCaller application need to make an external request from the phone to your servers to find out if it's a spam number?
Yes and no. We have some list of popular spam numbers, finite list, obviously, that we periodically get from our signals. So that information is already cached on the phone. So even if you're offline, you can access that information. And if the spam call is on that list, then it's marked as a spam to the user. And that's essentially how it works for iPhone as well, because for iPhone, you don't actually get call events programmatically, which means your only bet is that semi-static list, which we update when the user opens the app. And that list is only protection, basically. But on Android, we also do live lookups, so to enhance that. So even if it's not in that list, it might still be marked as spam in our system. So that information comes from a live lookup as you receive the call.
So from my personal experience, SMS spam and robo-dialing have both gotten significantly worse in recent years. And I don't know if this is because of Twilio or because of cheap cloud computing in general, or maybe I'm just an outlier and I gave away my phone number too many times. But is that accurate? Is there more spam than ever before?
Yes. I mean, that we can clearly see in our traffic, in our logs. Like, of course, we are growing in user base, but even if we normalize that by per user basis, it's a significant trend going up. Basically, US is definitely one of those countries. Actually, just a few days ago, there was an article about this somewhere I read. Like robocalls and spam numbers significantly growing in the last years. Like the "don't call me" list not working and such. So, in the end, that's a trend that we see. But we are trying to capture all those signals, even if people don't mark people as spam. Like there are some patterns that we are trying to grab. Like if a phone number is calling 100 people in just a matter of hours or an hour, then it's very likely that number is used for spam purposes. So those kind of signals we are actually trying to get more and more intelligent every iteration with our algorithms.
So if there is a number that so if you have all these phones out there with TrueCaller installed, and through your systems you see a certain phone number that makes 100 requests to phone numbers throughout your TrueCaller system, and you say that this seems like suspicious information. This seems like suspicious behavior. How does that translate to the number eventually being blocked? Do you still have to get at least one report from one of the people that says this is a robocaller?
I would prefer not sharing the details of the algorithms, but it's essentially a combination of all those signals. So, like, this is one input, and being marked by our users as spam is another input. Some web crawling, publicly available data crawling is another input that we use, and we get all those things in and get the likelihood scoring out, and based on that we have different thresholds for different markets because of call patterns are different, our user base are different. So that is also another market info is another input to the system. So that's essentially how it works.
Sure. So Twilio is this SMS and telephony as a service cloud computing company. Do you think that Twilio is a source of significant phone spam?
Well, I mean, for us, it's very hard to trace that back. If it's a Twilio number or somewhere else, and frankly, we prefer not to care about that because they are actually serving a lot of good use cases as well. So probably they are working on blocking spam on their side. So that's what I know.
Certainly.
I don't think we care about tracing it back to provider X or Y or Z.
Do you do integrations with telecom providers to get more close to the source type of information to improve TrueCaller?
No, not really. We have some ongoing partnerships, but nothing concrete so far. It's a bit hard to do those kind of partnerships. Telco companies, they are usually very slow, very big, heavily regulated, so they don't have the agility of a startup like we have. So it's very hard to do that kind of partnerships. So essentially, no. But we are trying from our side.
can you ask like the NSA to get some of the telecom information and forward it to you, perhaps?
Maybe.
So, okay, you mentioned scalability. TrueCaller has a lot of data, and your company has been around for 7 years. How has your storage model evolved over time?
Well, initially it was just one server, basically. That was all. And then essentially grew into what it is today. So our storage model, I think it is pretty simple. We don't really have that much sophistication for a few reasons. Maybe I can tell you a bit more information about that. A, for technical reasons, and B, for regulatory reasons. We actually serve main traffic from a single data center. So that's both good and bad. Good in terms of, significantly less complexity, but of course bad in terms of redundancy and failover scenarios. So what we are doing instead is we are actually using our main data center as source of truth data, essentially driven by regulatory reasons, licensing and regulatory reasons for us, because we store and process data coming from our users, user-generated content in a sense, and that requires us certain specific license from Swedish government and European Union, and that also implies to have source of truth data somewhere internal in European Union, basically. So that's part one, and of course we want to have redundancy and we want to get closer to our users. And for that to happen, we are adding public cloud components to the picture. So data is in a way pushed towards the edges, which are closer to our users, not essentially stored there for long, but in an ephemeral storage type of cache layer closer to the users. That's essentially the strategy for us for now. As I said, both technical reasons and regulatory reasons.
Sure. So what about the internal infrastructure of your servers? Do you have a microservices architecture, or tell me more about your backend services?
So we have a microservices architecture internally. So we are using JVM microservices, basically. Some services Java and some services Scala internally. And the data store layer is source of truth data is mainly MySQL, MariaDB still. And we have some derivative data store that we use for certain services, and some of them are from Elasticsearch. It's a component heavily used internally, and some of them are still served directly from some MySQL clusters, MariaDB clusters. So that's essentially what it is. Of course, there are certain components that every system of this scale uses, like cache layer. We're using Memcached and Redis for some stuff. We are using Kafka heavily internally, and for analytics and event tracking pipeline, we are using Kafka and Hadoop for some offline processing and such. So that's essentially how it looks. But front end user-facing services are all REST-like APIs, microservices.
Do you have any other processing systems other than Hadoop, like Spark or Storm, to do more timely analytics on stuff like phone numbers?
Yes, exactly. Both for business metrics and also like sophisticated algorithms like spam blocking and such. We are using Spark jobs actually. So that's a lot of data that we continuously process, and some of them it makes sense to process in a stream fashion. Some of them you just sweep the whole data and do some aggregations and such. But majority of those processes are actually Spark processes for us. Yes.
Could you contrast why you would use Spark in one type of job and why you would use Hadoop in a different type of job? Maybe you can give an example of each of those.
So when we look at, for example, user stories, like how our users are using our app, what are the functionalities that they are interested in, they are using recurrently and such, that is by definition naturally sliced and diced based on markets, based on user groups, based on maybe platforms, maybe phone models like high-end devices, low-end devices, and such. So that's essentially not time critical for us, but very good information, and also that's a lot of information that we sweep through. So for those kind of things, like maybe the data structure on the HDFS side is fit into that model of thinking, and then maybe just basic Hive queries are good enough for getting that type of information. But on the other hand, we have a lot of signals coming from our users, both for TrueCaller users, also like other people, non-TrueCaller users, calling TrueCaller users as well. That's also sometimes a signal that we receive from our users if they do the lookup for that phone number. So we process all those information and spam information, and that needs to be near real time. So Spark jobs are actually quite nice to get that type of events onto a pipeline, which is essentially a dummy service backed up by Kafka queues, and consumers consuming from those topics on Kafka and just passing that to some stream processing jobs, basically. So it's important because we have to process it near real time, because as I said, spam numbers are usually recycled, so we have to be quick.
There are so many client front ends that you have to build for TrueCaller because you want it deployed on Android and BlackBerry and iOS and all these other phone manufacturers. How do you keep all of these up to date?
Well, that's a significant engineering challenge, actually. What we do is basically, let me give you a brief info about how engineering works in TrueCaller. So we have the engineering teams, my team's basically tech side, and we also have another team, we call it product team basically, which is coupled. So basically product team internally, they focus on prioritizations and what to build, in what order, what would be the user value, how people are seeing those features and such. And they can come up with their own prioritization. And on the engineering side, there's a coupled side to it. On the engineering side, engineering managers do their own prioritization and they sit down and sync, basically. And based on those syncs, we look at what is the impact to user, what is the cost of development, what is cost of maintenance and such. So that process is followed by what to build. And for each platform, we have like persistent teams, like an Android team, an iPhone team, one man on Windows Phone platform. So small teams, but they focus on their platforms, so they know all the UX patterns and all the platform intricacies and such, and take those product backlogs and make it happen. So keeping them in sync is a big deal because each platform, they have their own capabilities and problems. I just briefly discussed actually iPhone platform, iOS platform is pretty much restricted. You cannot get call history, you cannot get call events and such. So what TrueCaller can do on that platform is a bit different than what we can do on Android, for example.
That's interesting. Does it lead to a situation where you can't maintain exact feature parity among the different clients because you just have different features, and so you actually have to build the product in a specific way where you can't expect to have be able to gather all the same types of data from all different clients?
Yes, exactly. And I mean, that started happening in the very, very early days, like 5 years ago. So we are okay with not being able to keep the feature parity. We are trying to be the best utility application in that domain within the platform constraints, basically. That's what we care about, and that's what our product owners, product managers care about, and that's what the engineering teams are trying to do, basically. And yes, they're always out of sync to some extent.
So you mentioned that you don't want to go into extreme detail about the algorithms and how you are figuring out what signals you want to listen to when you're aggregating your spam database, but could you tell me some about the kinds of machine learning, the kinds of data science, the general strategies that you are using to develop effective algorithms for detecting spam?
Well, of course. I mean, I'm not hands-on one of the people in that team to know, all the technical details, but I can give you, a brief overview of it. So one thing that we care a lot is actually being able to process that signal quickly. And another thing is actually taking the user base factor out of the equation, out of the system. What I mean by that is the signals that we see are heavily coupled to how big the market is, how the call patterns are. For example, in some countries, after a certain time in the evening, you see no calls at all because it's actually seen as rude culturally. But in some other countries, they are calling the same until they sleep, basically, like in every hour. So those call patterns are different. So we are actually trying to, one big challenge for us is try to normalize that. Like call patterns, calling hours, who calls who, do you make most of your calls within your social circle, or do you actually make a lot of calls outside the circle? And what is the norm for the whole population for that market? So those kind of things, those are more or less essentially like some statistical information over what we see on our systems. And we take those statistical signals, and feed that back into the system so that we normalize those things. So we don't act the same way as we do in India versus Sweden, because those are culturally very different. Population densities are different. TrueCaller penetration is very much different. So we treat them differently with different thresholds and such.
Software Engineering Daily is growing. More than 10,000 people listen to Software Engineering Daily every day, and I take that as a sign that this is something unique that people value. I am expanding the scope of the project, and I want to get other people involved. Send me an email at softwareengineeringdaily@gmail.com. I'm looking for new hosts, and I'm also looking for engineering and design help to help build a better website to host this content. Once I have a better site, the podcast can expand beyond audio content and into written word. If you're like me, you are not satisfied with the quality of material online about software engineering. If you have any suggestions or comments about what you would like to see more of on Software Engineering Daily, what you would like to see Software Engineering Daily evolve into, send me an email. I'm also looking for sponsors. If your company would like to support Software Engineering Daily, please send me an email at softwareengineeringdaily@gmail.com. There's advertising availability, and there's also other ways to support the show. Just send me an email if you're interested. Today, the show is generating enough money for me to make this a full-time job, but I would like to increase the cash flows so that I can reinvest that money into projects related to Software Engineering Daily. It's been almost a year since I started Software Engineering Daily, and I'm incredibly thankful that the listenership and the support has turned this into a sustainable business. If you are ever dissatisfied with the show, send me an email, send me a Slack message, send me a tweet. Let me know what I can do better. And as always, thanks for listening to Software Engineering Daily. Can you talk more about how you built out the data science team or the machine learning team?
Oh boy, that's probably one of the hardest things to build. Both structurally, because Hadoop ecosystem is rapidly changing. If you look at relational databases and sites there for, 20 plus years, it's very mature. The tooling is nice and tidy and such. Of course, there are cases that it is good for. There are cases that you need something else, right? But for Hadoop side, it's always changing. Like just the last 2 years or so, we are using HDFS. We changed a lot of things all the time, and failure modes are very, very interesting. So the operational side requires a lot of hands-on knowledge. Like everyone thinks that, it's fault tolerant, it's built to be fault tolerant, so it can fail, whatever, you can continue, which is usually not the case, because when things fail, you either lose capacity or you lose some of the critical processes. So you have to be actively developing for the system to keep the systems resilient, basically. Another big challenge was actually finding people, because it's a super, super hot topic. Every company, just for the sake of having data scientists, they want to have data scientists in the team. Even if their problems are not really large scale, even if they don't really need machine learning or other sophisticated methods, they still want to have data scientists. They still want to have big teams and such. So finding people was one of the big challenges for us. But once we have the infrastructure, once we have the operational knowledge, and once we have the people, actually our challenges are size of data and the variance in different signals. That's so much interesting that actually keeping the team busy and happy was not a big challenge after that point. But the initial challenges were really, really hard. I can say that was the hardest team under tech to build.
Sounds like just because it's so specialized, it's in such high demand.
Yeah, exactly.
So what about ops or DevOps, or what is your methodology for uptime, and do you have a team around that?
Yeah, we actually have a separate team around that. A very small team, actually, a team of 3 people. So since we have physical machines, we actually have to have some physical operations as well, like racking servers, changing the disks and such. So we are not a cloud-only company in that sense, in terms of infrastructure. So that is one part of their responsibility. But big part of their responsibility is actually keeping the software stack components working, like oiling the machinery, basically. The platform team, the backend teams, they actually own a big part of the operational responsibility as well. But there are certain things we want to keep in the operations team, like for security, safety reasons, for operational compatibility between software components and such. So that's essentially how it is on a large, on a broad overview. So it's just 3 people, which means someone needs to share that responsibility. And what we are trying to do is starting from the front end all the way to analytics and back end platform engineering. Everyone actually shares that operational responsibility. When things happen, when bugs happen or general system failures happen, we just do whatever we can within our domain, basically. So that's how it is. About uptime, of course, it's a main concern, especially as I mentioned before, we hold the source of truth data in one data center at the moment with some redundancy and backups and other safety measures, but still majority of the traffic is going to be limited by cache hits if that data center is not responding or down or not connected. So that requires a lot of work for building resilient systems, and we are actively working on that. For example, between the microservices, we have a lot of internal service calls. So for all of them, we are actually following a pattern of having circuit breakers. So if one part fails, the circuit breaks and the other parts don't get affected. So they fail gracefully in a way. So we have all those principles internalized between operations and backend platform.
You've mentioned that you are on your own data center a couple times. And did you say that's mainly for compliance reasons? What kinds of compliance are there around storing phone numbers and user data?
So we are actually working, we have a legal team internally working very closely with the relevant bodies in Sweden and European Union. Well, I mean, essentially, the compliance is not really very strict. It's not like PCI compliance and credit card information and such. It's not as standardized as those. So it's a bit hard for us to get that information. Like, okay, we want to comply, but to what? So we work, sometimes we work case by case with the government bodies to understand what we can do, what we cannot do. For example, that edge location ephemeral storage thing I mentioned, that was one of those things. Like we were not sure if we can move data outside the data center, and we just realized that is possible with those constraints, like not having persistent storage and such. So essentially the big constraint for us was actually keeping data within the EU borders. So that was the hardest constraint for us, because that actually rules out having redundancy on multiple regions outside the EU, which is essentially where our users are mostly.
Exactly. I mean, like India is one of the things I wanted to talk about, but I mean, are there types of features that you literally cannot build because you can't get to the cloud, or is it more a matter of redundancy and speed?
I think a little bit of both. I don't think. I mean, we are actually following a general roadmap. Like we prioritize stuff and such. And so far, I don't really see any big blocks because of these compliance reasons. That didn't really happen. As I said, we end up sometimes with some compromises. Like I would probably design the general architecture a little bit different if I didn't have those compliance constraints. But it was never a real, showstopper for us. We find workarounds for those constraints.
Okay.
As long as we don't compromise the user data security, basically.
So you mentioned that the big big markets for you are outside of the EU. One of those markets is India. So explain why TrueCaller is extremely popular in India.
Yep. So one thing for us that we recurrently see in several different markets is if a market has a lot of spam calls, then that's a very, very good market for TrueCaller. So that was the case for India, for sure. Another thing is lack of proper white pages, yellow pages, publicly available information. So in those countries, in majority of the countries that we are big, there's a clear absence of white pages, yellow pages, reliable source of data. So which means that they cannot just, get the phone number, Google it, and find the information easily. So our information is bringing something which the market lacks, basically. So I think both cases were very much there for India. And another pattern that we see is in India, culturally, people call each other a lot because mainly in the Western world, we have more structured lifestyles, like typical things like practicalities, city life and such. It's more structured and controlled, but it's much more chaotic in countries like India, for example. They have their own solutions to problems. They care a lot about being cost efficient and such. And telco companies, they actually propose, they actually bring very low cost phone call and SMS to people. So they actually solve a lot of problems by, instead of creating, big fancy sophisticated structures, they solve the problems by making extra phone calls. I'm here, where are you? Where is the delivery? Who is picking up that packet? So those kind of things, instead of having more sophisticated systems, they actually do more calls. So those are the patterns that we see. And that was the case for a lot of Middle Eastern countries, India, and now we're actually rapidly growing in US and some other Western markets as well. Sub-Saharan Africa is getting bigger every day also.
The race to connect people to the internet in India is a very interesting topic that we've touched on a couple of times on this show. So this race to connect people has really heated up. And last year, TrueCaller was very outspoken about Facebook's free basics program, and I thought this would be an interesting topic of conversation. Why did TrueCaller see free basics as problematic? This was the free Facebook service that is essentially presents a walled garden to you. You get Facebook for free, you get Wikipedia for free, you get some other services for free, but you don't get everything for free. Yeah. So why was this problematic?
Yeah, we were kind of in that discussion, considering like if you just go and check app stores in India, like in top 5, let's say, you see Facebook, you see Google, and you see TrueCaller as well. So as one of those players, a lot of people reached out to us what we think and such. So what I can say, both personally and also from the company perspective, what I can say is the problem with that approach was you would give like free bandwidth in a sense, but to a walled garden, and if you just go and check the list of applications which are allowed in that walled garden, you don't have free choice for your provider. For each service you have 1 or 2 providers maybe. So it's essentially it was definitely helping Facebook and a few other providers in different domains, but it was stopping the free evolution of the internet, and whoever actually provides value to the users, they should be reachable. And this kind of approach would inherently leave the market stop or cause the market stop innovating. So
that's right for sure. But Free Basics wasn't forced upon anybody, though. It was just an option that you could use as a person in India. Why was it problematic for Facebook to even present the option to users?
But India is essentially very much price sensitive. So something being free but optional actually means for a lot of people, for a lot of communities, it actually means that you would not go for the paid option at all because of cost reasons, and that's a different discussion to make, of course. But that's essentially how it is. So although it is not framed as a mandatory thing and such, it was optional. But it would definitely affect the innovation, for sure.
So
for
speaking of
infrastructure investments and such, as well as other services.
Yeah, I'm sympathetic to that. So speaking of Facebook, Facebook has become this identity system of the internet. And I think of my phone number as another unique form of identity, but it's become less of a de facto identity form. Why don't we use our phone number as our OAuth system?
Well, that's essentially one of the things that we are heavily betting on. I don't know if you know, but we have a product offering called TrueSDK, which is essentially what you just explained, like using mobile phones as a form of identity. It's not essentially a OAuth provider type of system, not yet at least. But what it does is using your phone number, so we can actually pass that information to other service provider apps or websites or whatever. We can provide that information with the user's consent, of course, and use your phone number as an identity. And the reason that we can do this together with some other companies like big ones, the reason we can do this is because we have a huge penetration in some of the markets, and also we rely on that information, phone number information, being verified by our systems already. So we already do that verification, and we might as well give the user the opportunity to use that information on other systems as well. And also from the app developers or service integration perspective, it's one problem less to think about, because someone else, in this case TrueCaller, manages and verifies phone numbers.
So for some time now, the phone number has been this unique abstraction that is almost like a hash code for who you are. But there are these other services like Facebook or Twitter, these other OAuth services that provide a more robust identity system. Why? So where does the phone number, the idea of the phone number, fit in versus those other identity systems for the future? What are the, I can think of different login systems where I use Facebook for this or I use Google for this. And there's different granularities of my identity that I expose to these different systems. What is the future of the idea of the phone number as a login tool?
Yes, you have a point. I mean, for each domain, you actually have a different set of information that you that you are comfortable with sharing. And for mobile phones, I think one significant thing as compared to Facebooks and Googles and LinkedIn's of the world is a lot of people that you communicate with, they have a phone, they have a mobile phone, they have smartphones and such, but not all of them are on Facebook, not all of them are on Google, not all of them are on Twitter. So if I look myself, for example, if I look at my communication with my friends, colleagues, family, and other people, some of them are on WhatsApp. Good. Some of them, they have Facebook accounts. Some of them are on Google. But I don't have a unified way of being able to reach all of them and seeing them as entities in those systems. So I don't have that. But I have all of them somewhat connected via their phone numbers still, because it's part of a relationship that I can just pick up the phone and have a synchronous communication, because all other forms are essentially asynchronous. Even instant messaging is, it can be delivered almost synchronously, but the other party may or may not see it, may or may not respond to it. It's a different story. But phone communication is still the most reliable synchronous way of communication. So it actually means a lot to keep that way of being able to reach out to people in your toolbox. That's essentially still very important. Still very strong. Yes, we use our phones less. Our phone call durations are actually getting shorter, but it actually means a lot to be able to do that if and when you need it.
Facebook announced this login system for Facebook recently where you actually don't need a Facebook account to log in. You just need a phone number. Is Facebook doing that to compete on the same axes that TrueCaller is competing on?
I think so. I mean, it's very hard to say right now because, those big companies, they usually have like 100 different bets on 100 different things, and all of a sudden 2 months later they drop half of them, right? So it's very hard to tell because we are a more focused company. We have about 80 people working only on this, as compared to a few people inside Facebook maybe working on this as one of the 100 projects. So It's very hard to say, but I think what I just explained, they can see it as well. They know that everyone is not gonna be comfortable or very active on Facebook, so they might as well enlarge their platform, because that's essentially a source of revenue, source of traffic, source of brand value for them as well. So they want to reach out to the other people which they cannot cover by the typical Facebook use. I think that makes sense.
I know we're up against your time. I want to close off by just getting the long-term vision for TrueCaller. What do you see the company transforming into?
So what we see is we want to own the communication and provide good communication means. One of the things about phone numbers, as you just actually mentioned, it's like a hash. It's a cryptic thing. It's not you as a person. It is some combination of some numbers, right? So we started by solving that problem and adding spam, and we have some some additions to improving the communication on our roadmap, and we want to go on that track. We don't want to digress a lot from that mission. I think we are doing pretty well for example, in India. We just mentioned about India, but in India we are on more than 1/3 of every smartphone right now, and it's growing. That ratio is growing, and the market is growing very fast. India is 1.2 billion people, but only 200 something smartphones. So the market is growing very rapidly. We want to just protect our position there. People, when we ask people how they see TrueCaller, they always mention safety, trust, those kind of words, which means our source of information that we provide to our users, that is actually that creates a lot of value for our users, because then they can trust the other party or not trust based on that information. So we want to keep that that relationship of trust with our users, and of course crack new markets, because our success is very much market dependent. Like I want to say actually in a way it is all or nothing in a certain market. So we want to add more markets to the picture. We have a bunch of them that we are very, very big, but we want to be a worldwide player like Google's and Facebook's. That's probably the next step for the company.
Umut, thanks for coming on the show. I am a big fan of TrueCaller. You guys are an awesome company, and I look forward to seeing what you guys do in the future.
Thank you very much for having me, and thanks.